Who let him cry like that? Frederick's young voice thundered through the marble corridors, sharp enough to stop the clocks. The cry had pierced the stillness of the mansion, and now so had he. Melissa Simmons froze mid-swipe of the window pane on the second floor, her microfiber cloth still damp in her hand. She had only been working in the Vale estate for 5 days, assigned to routine cleaning on the east wing. No one ever mentioned the 5th floor. In fact, most of the staff avoided it like it was cursed. But that sound, the shrill, cyclical sobbing that now rose again, wasn't something she could ignore. It wasn't a hungry cry. It wasn't sleepy or cranky. It was the sound of panic, the kind that clawed from the inside out. "Miss," the butler called from downstairs. "Stay clear of the upper wing." She didn't answer. Melissa climbed the final steps, heart racing. At the end of the hallway, behind a partially opened door, flickering light pulsed from a sensory projector. A boy, maybe 7, sat curled on the carpeted floor, rocking violently, hitting his forehead in rhythm against a bookshelf. No supervision, no comfort, just pain and repetition. She paused at the threshold. Everything in her said to turn back, but something deeper, something old and buried, kept her rooted. Her brother Bennett used to do the same thing, same rocking, same sound. She remembered it vividly under the dinner table, arms tight across his chest, face stray with tears no one could understand. Melissa stepped softly into the room and crouched several feet away. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, voice barely audible over his cries. "I'm not going to touch you. Just sitting right here." The boy didn't respond, but his movement slowed slightly. She kept her hands in sight, palms up. Then slowly, she lifted one hand and traced a simple sign across her chest. Safe, a motion she hadn't used in years, one her grandmother had taught her to calm Bennett when words failed. The boy glanced at her, just a flicker, then resumed rocking. A sharp voice cut through the air behind her. "What the hell are you doing?" Melissa turned quickly. Frederick Young stood in the doorway, a towering figure of tailored precision and barely contained fury. In one hand, he clutched his phone. The other gripped the door knob like it might snap under his fingers. "I'm sorry, sir," Melissa said, standing instinctively. "I heard him crying. And who gave you permission to be in this room?" "No one. I thought he might be in danger. Step away from my son." Her muscles stiffened, but she obeyed. Carefully, she stepped aside as Frederick strode toward the boy. The moment he tried to lift his son, the child erupted, screaming louder, kicking, clawing, his arms flailing in full panic. Frederick struggled to hold him, shocked by the intensity. "What's wrong with him?" he muttered. "Why does he?" "May I?" Melissa said gently, stepping forward again. Frederick didn't stop her. She knelt, reached out, and the moment the child felt her presence, his screaming eased. He twisted toward her and collapsed into her arms like he'd been waiting for her all along. His small hands gripped her sleeve. He buried his face in her shoulder. The silence that followed was absolute. If this moment touched your heart, give Melissa a like. She didn't save him with words, but with quiet empathy. And tell us in the comments where you're watching this from. You might not be the only one nearby feeling the same warmth right now. Frederick stared, stunned. "How? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, sir," Melissa said softly. "I just listened and signed. Sign language a little. My brother, he's non-verbal autistic. This used to help him calm down." Frederick's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His suit looked suddenly too tight for him. His presence, so forceful a minute ago, was now suspended, like he didn't know what to do with himself. "What's your name?" he asked. "Melissa Simmons. I clean the East Wing." "You're not a therapist?" "No, sir, just a cleaner." He watched her hold his son like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can you stay a little longer today?" Melissa nodded, still swaying gently with the boy in her arms. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Frederick turned, walking slowly out of the room. For the first time in months, the house was still. No echoes of pain, no tense footsteps, no slammed doors, just a boy and a stranger now. Not so strange, wrapped in quiet understanding. And though Frederick didn't say it, the look on his face said everything. Something had shifted. Something was beginning. The sun had dipped lower by the time Melissa descended the stairs again, her back slightly aching from holding the boy for so long. Aaron Douglas had heard Frederick call him that one Shad finally drifted to sleep in her arms. His face pressed into the curve of her shoulder like he belonged there. She had laid him gently on a beanbag in the corner of his nursery, covering him with a weighted blanket she'd found folded in the closet. He hadn't stirred. Now the grand mansion felt heavier than it had when she first entered it. Each chandelier sparkled but felt cold. Each marble tile under her feet clicked like a reminder that she didn't belong. She was a cleaner, a temp no less, and she had just broken a major boundary. She turned towards the service hallway, expecting to be dismissed, maybe even terminated on the spot. "Miss Simmons." The voice came from behind her, clipped and clear. She turned and found Frederick Young standing at the end of the corridor, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He was no longer holding his phone. Instead, he held a small notepad, a legal pad, the kind that usually came out when something official was about to happen. Melissa straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir. In my office, please." Her heart sank a little. She nodded and followed him down the long hallway, through a set of double doors, into an office she had only ever dusted from the outside. It was immaculate, modern, and sparsely decorated. Dark wood shelves held books with uncreased spines. A wall of windows looked out over the private garden. On the far end sat a massive desk of polished oak. He gestured to the chair in front of the desk. "Sit." 1. Melissa obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. Frederick sat opposite her and remained silent for several seconds. He tapped a pen against the edge of the notepad. She could hear a grandfather clock ticking somewhere in the distance. It felt like a courtroom, and she didn't know if she was the witness or the accused. "You handled him like someone who'd done it 100 times, he said finally. "I haven't, not with him, just with someone like him." "Your brother?" "Yes, sir. Bennett. He passed away 4 years ago. He was 10. Frederick's eyes flicked up, and for a moment something human passed across his face. "I'm sorry. Thank you." He was silent again. Then he leaned back in his chair. "No therapist, no specialist, no trained professional has been able to calm Eli down like that. Not in 2 years. They all failed. And you? You just walked in there with a rag in your hand and fixed him." Melissa's throat tightened. "I didn't fix him, sir. I just saw him." "Ugh." That stopped him. The pen he'd been tapping fell still. "You saw him. Children like Eli. They don't need to be fixed, they need to be heard. You can't rush their silence. You have to be willing to sit in it with them." Frederick blinked slowly. "You sound like someone who should be doing more than mopping floors." "I'm just someone who needed a job, sir. My grandmother's got medical bills, and this pays better than the diner." He looked down at his notes, then closed the notepad altogether. "I want to make you an offer." Melissa blinked. "Sir, I need someone who can connect with Eli. Someone who can be consistent, not another overqualified stranger with a clipboard and a 2-week contract. Someone he already trusts. I'm not a nanny. I don't need a nanny. I need you." She shook her head gently. "Sir, with all due respect, I'll double your pay," he said, not giving her the space to finish. "You'll stay in the staff wing, private room, all expenses handled. Weekends off health insurance, if you don't already have any, and you'll never lift a mop again." Melissa felt her heart racing. The numbers danced in her head. That kind of money could mean real treatment for Grandma Erica. No more skipped medications. No more stretching food stamps. But she also knew the risk. This wasn't just a job. This was a boy owned with fragile patterns and even more fragile trust. If she accepted and failed him, it wouldn't be just another nanny leaving. It would be betrayal. I don't know if I can." Frederick leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "Look, I've had behaviorists with degrees from Stanford, nannies from elite agencies, even a family counselor who charged $2,000 an hour. None of them lasted more than a week. You walked in, said nothing, and my son laid his head on your shoulder. I don't know what that is, but I know it's rare." Melissa swallowed. "It's not magic, sir. It's just care. That's even rarer." She looked down at her hands, chipped nail polish, and all. She thought about Erica, about the quiet way she'd say, Baby, if God opens a door, don't stand there arguing about the knob. When would I start? Tomorrow morning, I'll have the room prepared tonight. Melissa nodded. Okay, I'll try. Frederick stood and extended his hand. She shook it small and firm. As she left the office, her mind was racing. She hadn't packed for a live-in job. She hadn't even told her landlord she was leaving. But beneath all that noise was something quieter, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The next morning, Melissa arrived with a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a cardboard box tucked under her arm. The housekeeper, Mrs. Jada Brown, led her to the staff quarters, the east side of the mansion near the back garden. The room was simple but warm. A twin bed, a reading chair, a desk facing the window. Mr. Young had this redone last night, Mrs. Jada Brown said, handing Melissa a key card. Said you were important. I'm just a helper. Maybe, but he don't give spare rooms to helpers. Melissa smiled politely and unpacked quickly. She kept her clothes on hangers and placed a small framed photo of Erica on the nightstand. By 9:30 a.m., she stood outside Eli's nursery again. This time, when she entered, the boy was already awake. He sat on the rug, sorting colored blocks into 2 piles in blue. Morning, Eli, she said softly. He didn't look up, but he paused just for a beat. She stepped closer, sat cross-legged a few feet away, quiet, non-threatening. After a few minutes, he nudged a red block toward her with his toe. She smiled. Thanks. She pushed a blue block back. The game had begun. Hours passed like that. No words, just color, rhythm, repetition. At one point, she began to hum soft, low, familiar gospel tones. Eli didn't protest. In fact, he leaned in slightly, the way someone might toward a warm fire. Frederick watched from the doorway in silence. He wasn't ready to say it out loud, but something about the way Melissa sat there still and steady, not trying to fix or force, made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand yet. Not grief, not fear, something else, hope. Melissa stood by the window of the nursery as dusk crept in, her arms loosely folded and her gaze fixed on the garden below. The day had passed more quietly than she expected. No screaming, no outbursts, no frantic running. Eli hadn't spoken, of course. He still moved in silence, mostly engaged with the wooden puzzles and color-sorting games she had laid out, but he had let her sit closer this time. He hadn't flinched when she sang a soft tune under her breath. He had even touched her sleeve once briefly when she reached across him for a blue triangle piece. That one small touch had lit something in her cautious, almost sacred kind of hope. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps. She turned just as Frederick Young entered the nursery. He wasn't in his usual suit, just a white shirt with the cuffs rolled in grey slack. His face looked less carved than usual, a little softer around the eyes. How was he today? He asked, his voice quieter than the sharp bark she remembered from their first meeting. Peaceful, she said, a faint smile lifting the corner of her lips. No meltdowns, no biting or hitting. He was steady. Frederick stepped farther into the room, his eyes on his son, who was now lying on his stomach, carefully pushing a toy train along the track. I don't know what you're doing, he muttered. But it's working. It's not a trick, Mr. Vale, she replied gently. It's time, it's presence, and letting him lead. He nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a language he had never learned to read. He used to love trains, he said suddenly. Emmy's wife used to take him to the railroad museum every other Saturday. Melissa's gaze turned toward Frederick. His face had turned toward the window now, eyes distant. He hasn't asked to go since she passed, he continued, his voice low and even. Not once. She didn't say anything, didn't push, just let the silence speak its part. I thought we were doing okay, he went on. After the funeral, I hired the best therapists money could find, enrolled him in every specialized program that accepted him. I spared nothing, but it only got worse. The tantrums, the fear of strangers, the screaming. He turned back to Melissa. And now here you are, and he's calmer than I've seen in over a year. Melissa shifted slightly. Grief isn't something you treat like a flu, Mr. Vale. It's not linear. Not for you, not for him. Frederick didn't answer right away. Then he asked, Do you think he remembers her? I think he feels her absence, she said after a pause. Even if he doesn't know how to say it, he sat in the armchair by the bookshelf, elbows on his knees, looking at his son with something between guilt and awe. I was married for 10 years, he said suddenly. We met in college. I was rigid. She was jazz. She laughed too loud. Danced barefoot on our balcony in the rain. Made breakfast at midnight. Melissa smiled. She sounds wonderful. She was, he said, and something in his voice cracked, just slightly. Eli looked up for a moment and locked eyes with his father. Frederick stood and approached his son slowly. Hey, bud, he said softly, crouching beside him. How's the train coming? Eli didn't speak, didn't react, but he didn't recoil either. Frederick looked up at Melissa. You think he'll ever talk again? I think he already is, she replied, her eyes warm. You just have to learn to listen to the version of language he trusts. He held his son's gaze a moment longer, then nodded and rose. Later that evening, Melissa returned to her room in the staff wing. It was modest, but comfortable. She had unpacked what little she had. 3 changes of clothes, 2 books, a battered journal, and a framed photo of her grandmother, Erica, holding a young Bennett. She picked it up now and ran her thumb across the glass. You'd like him, she whispered. He's a mess, but he's trying. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Jada Brown holding a tray with a covered plate and a folded napkin. Mr. Young says you haven't eaten since lunch, the older woman said, a curious note in her voice. He insisted you get a proper dinner. Mia blinked. I didn't realize. I lost track of time. Apparently, so did the boy. He didn't scream at all today. Miracle of miracles. Melissa accepted the tray with a grateful smile. Thank you. Before she turned to go, Mrs. Jada Brown lingered. Don't get too comfortable, she warned, but her voice held no malice. Mr. Vale changes moods like the wind. Melissa nodded once. I don't expect anything. She closed the door and sat down at her desk, lifting the lid on the plate. Grilled salmon, roasted sweet potatoes, and Jada Brown beans. Her stomach grumbled in response. As she ate, her mind kept replaying the image of Frederick on the floor beside his son. It had been brief, but genuine, vulnerable, and she couldn't help but wonder, what kind of man tries to control the world, but forgets how to hold his child? The next morning, Melissa entered the nursery at 8:30 sharp. Eli was already awake, sitting by the window, tracing shapes on the glass with his finger. The sunlight cut a warm line across the carpet. Morning, Eli, she said softly, approaching slowly. He didn't turn, but he didn't stiffen either. She sat beside him, not too close. After a few quiet minutes, she took out a small whiteboard and a dry erase marker. I thought we could try something, she said gently. She drew a sun, then a cloud, then handed the marker to him. He stared at it for a long moment, then took it slowly and drew a crooked heart. Melissa smiled even as tears stung behind her eyes. From the hallway, Frederick had stopped outside the door. He watched the moment through the crack in the frame, his hand hovering near the handle, but not opening it. Something inside him was shifting slowly, painfully, like an old hinge learning to swing again. He turned away before they noticed, but his thoughts stayed in the room. That night, he sat alone in his study with a glass of scotch he didn't drink. On the desk lay a file, Melissa Simmons' employee application, her background check, and a handwritten reference letter from her former manager at a diner in Queens. He read the note twice. She's not fancy, but she shows up early, works late, and never complains. She's kind, and she knows how to listen, even when people don't know how to talk. Frederick folded the paper and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the wind stirred the trees along the stone fence. Inside, for the first time in months, the silence felt like comfort, not a void. In a house built by money, guarded by rules and haunted by loss, someone had finally arrived who didn't try to fix the cracks. She simply sat beside them. And for Eli, and maybe for Frederick too, that was enough to begin again. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Melissa Simmons had taken the job that wasn't hers to begin with, caring for the boy no one could reach, and by now her presence in the Vale mansion had gone from anomaly to necessity. Each morning she entered Eli's nursery with the same quiet ritual. No sudden movements, no grand gestures, just the steady rhythm of showing up, And in return, Eli began to offer more. He hadn't spoken, not once. But his eyes began to seek her out. He followed her with silent trust. He handed her objects, little things, a block, a button, a puzzle, pieces, as if they were messages he didn't yet know how to write. That morning, Melissa laid a new routine before him. She brought in a soft mat, some scented clay, and a series of cards with emotions drawn in bold, cartoonish expressions. "This one's happy," she said, showing the first card. "Happy like when the music plays." Eli took the card, touched it once, then looked up at her face. Slowly, he pressed the card to his own chest. "Yeah," she whispered. "That's right." When Frederick came home that evening, the house felt different again. Not silent the way it had been for a year. Not empty, but humming faintly with signs of life. In the kitchen, Mrs. Jada Brown had soft jazz playing from the tablet. The windows were cracked open. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed, not loud, not boisterous, but a quick, pure giggle that stopped him in his tracks. He dropped his keys onto the hallway console and followed the sound. Melissa was kneeling on the living room carpet, a toy giraffe in one hand, a sock puppet on the other. Eli sat across from her, cross-legged, watching intently as the giraffe and the sock puppet mimed a silly fight over a cup of pretend tea, when the sock puppet fell over with a squeaky oof. Eli's mouth stretched into a full smile. No sound came, but his whole face lit up. Frederick couldn't remember the last time he'd seen it. Melissa noticed him in the doorway. She straightened quickly, brushing lint from her slacks. "Mr. Vale, I didn't hear you come in." He walked in slowly, still looking at Eli. Was that him laughing? She nodded. Sort of. No sound, but he's getting close. Frederick crouched beside his son. "Hey, buddy," he said. Eli didn't retreat. He didn't flinch. He reached out and touched his father's shirt briefly before turning back to the toys. Frederick felt his throat tighten. "He's trusting you more," Melissa said softly. Frederick nodded, but didn't look away from his son. He used to play with Angel Parker like that. She had this sock puppet voice. It was ridiculous, but he loved it. He stood up and looked down at Melissa. "Thank you." She gave a faint smile, eyes warm. "I'm not doing anything you couldn't do. That's the part I find hardest to believe," he said, half joking, half defeated. Later that night, Melissa made her way to the small garden behind the staff wing. It was late spring, and the ailus had just started to bloom. She carried a mug of tea, her grandmother's blend cinnamon, and dried hibiscus. She sat on the wooden bench under the magnolia tree and breathed. She'd been afraid at first that her time here would be temporary. That one wrong word, one wrong moment would send her back to mopping floors. But Frederick hadn't just tolerated her. He'd started seeking her out. At first only about Eli, then about meals, then books, and lately just conversation. She didn't fool herself into thinking she belonged in his world. He was white, wealthy, powerful, and guarded. She was none of those things. But when they talked, truly talked, there was something level in it. Human. The garden gate creaked behind her. She turned. Frederick stood in the moonlight holding 2 mugs. "I thought you might like chamomile," he said. She blinked, surprised. "That's very thoughtful." I figured it's either that or more bourbon. And you don't strike me as a bourbon before bed person." She chuckled, number. "That would put me straight on my back." He sat beside her, not too close. "You come out here every night when I can't sleep." "Same." They sipped in silence for a moment. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, his voice quieter now, more careful. "Your brother, what happened?" She exhaled slow. "He had a seizure. Complications from an infection. He passed in the hospital while I was filling out paperwork for insurance." Frederick looked at her. "I'm sorry." "Thank you. He was the only person in the world who saw me without expecting anything back." He was quiet, then said, "That sounds like Eli." "Yeah," she said softly. "It does." Another pause. Frederick ran a hand through his hair. "You make this look easy, but I know it's not. I know I'm difficult, that this house can be cold, that Eli's challenges can be overwhelming." She turned to him. "You're not difficult, Mr. Vale. You're just grieving in the only way you know how." His eyes met hers. "Call me Frederick, please." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, Frederick. A gust of wind rustled the branches. The lights from the second floor glowed softly through the windows. Somewhere above them, Eli stirred in his bed. "I want to learn," Frederick said suddenly. "I want to know what you know about him, about how to reach him." Melissa's heart beat faster. "You're already halfway there. Number, I watch you with him. The way you read his cues, the way you understand what he needs before he asks." I don't have that instinct." "You don't need instinct," she said. "You need willingness, and he'll teach you if you're patient enough to listen." He looked at her, and for a moment something shifted in the air between them. "I want to try," he said. And for the first time Melissa saw not the CEO, not the man with perfect posture and calculated words, but a father uncertain, flawed, and finally ready. The next day, everything changed. Melissa led a small lesson in the living room. Simple sign language, more, stop, help, love. Frederick joined them, clumsy but earnest. Eli watched, then copied. At one point, Frederick signed more, and Eli responded with a half-formed version of the same gesture. Frederick's eyes filled, but he didn't say a word, just nodded, smiled, and reached for his son's hand. Later that evening, Melissa wrote in her journal by the window, recounting the moment. "He's coming back to his son," she wrote. "Not as a savior, not as a fixer, but as a father learning a new language. One built on silence, trust, and steady hands." She looked up as a knock came at her door. Frederick stood outside holding a book. "I found this in Angel Parker Things," he said. "It's about parenting children with sensory disorders. I thought you might want to read it together." She took it gently. "I'd like that." And then he added before walking away, "Thank you for staying." That night, Melissa sat on her bed, the book in her lap, and the memory of Bennett warm in her chest. She wasn't just staying. She was building something slowly, quietly, like Eli's laughter, like trust blooming between unlikely hands. The early summer light streamed through the nursery windows, casting golden beams onto the wooden floor. Melissa sat cross-legged across from Eli, gently encouraging him to press different animal shapes into a soft patch of kinetic sand. It was part of their morning routine, now sensory time before breakfast, a calm, consistent way to ease him into the day. Eli didn't speak, but he responded more and more with eye contact, small gestures, even tentative smiles. When Melissa sang softly, he swayed. When she laughed, he tilted his head to watch her longer. And once, when she reached for the sand mold he liked, he touched her wrist and pushed it gently toward her. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond, but his fingers brushed her palm in reply. Frederick had begun joining these sessions 3 times a week. He no longer hovered in the background, arms folded and unreadable. Now he knelt beside his son, mimicking Mia's gestures, learning the signs slowly but with deep concentration. Cow. Mia signed that morning, forming the horns with her fingers. Eli didn't copy, but he stared, then pointed to the small cow figure on the mat and pressed it into the sand with surprising care. Frederick laughed quietly but genuinely. "He's getting it," he said. Melissa smiled, then turned toward him. "So are you." That afternoon, Frederick invited her to walk the garden with him after lunch. Eli had fallen asleep in the sunroom, a blanket loosely wrapped around him, and a stuffed bear held tight in one hand. Melissa hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was still professional, but then followed him out past the manicured hedges down toward the old gazebo. They walked slowly side by side. Frederick had removed his jacket and loosened his collar. It was the first time she'd seen him without that ever-present armor. Eli's therapist called this morning. He said, "I didn't mention it earlier because I wanted to see how today went." Melissa looked up. "Is everything all right?" She said, "His developmental milestones are still delayed, but she noted significant behavioral improvements. He's beginning to trust again," Melissa said softly. "That takes more than therapy. That takes safety." Frederick nodded, hands in his pockets. She also said, "Well?" She asked what changed in the home environment. "I told her it was you." Melissa chuckled, brushing a braid back behind her ear. "I'm just one part of it." He stopped walking and turned toward her. "You're the part that matters." She met his eyes, and for a brief second, the world narrowed. The breeze slowed. The sound of birds faded. Frederick's expression was different now, not the guarded, clipped detachment she'd come to expect, but something quieter, raw. Before Angel Parker died, he began, his voice more gravel than usual. She said I was always 2 steps behind, that I never saw what was in front of me until it was too late. Melissa said nothing, only listened. She handled everything. The school forms, the therapy sessions, the tantrums. I just wrote the checks. He swallowed hard. And when she got sick, I panicked. I started controlling everything, as if order could save her, as if structure could replace her presence. Grief makes us grasp for anything that doesn't move, Ma said gently, because what moves might disappear. He looked at her sharply, surprised, then slowly nodded. You speak like someone who's lost something. Someone who's lost someone, she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. We all carry echoes. They continued walking in silence. The shadows stretched across the garden. Melissa reached out and touched a blooming camellia. These used to grow outside my grandmother's porch, she murmured. She used to say they were stubborn flowers, that they bloomed when they felt like it, not when others expected them to. Sounds familiar, Frederick said. She smiled. I suppose it does. That evening, as the sun dipped low and Eli napped on the couch, Melissa found herself in the study. Frederick had invited her to review an old therapy binder he'd found in the closet notes and videos from Eli's earliest sessions. Angel Parker filmed everything, he said, handing her a USB drive. She always said, one day, we'll forget the hard parts and miss the details. Let's save the details. Melissa sat at the desk and opened the folder on the screen. The first video began to play. A much younger Ella, maybe 4 years old, sat at a low table with a therapist. Angel Parker voice narrated gently from behind the camera, coaching Frederick on how to use signs for eat, sleep, and mom. Melissa watched in stillness as the video continued. In one clip, Eli reached toward Frederick and signed love clumsily. Angel Parker laughter followed. That's your daddy, baby. Good job. Melissa turned slightly in her chair to see Frederick standing in the doorway. He didn't enter, just watched. His face had gone pale. I forgot about that video, he said. I haven't watched these since before the funeral. She was good with him, Melissa said. She was everything, he replied. His voice cracked just a little. And I erased her. Melissa stood and walked slowly to where he was. No, you didn't. You were surviving. You were breaking open in silence. Frederick looked down at her. Is that what I was doing? Yes, but now you're healing. He stared at her, unreadable. And you? Are you healing too? She paused. I think so. Some days more than others. For a long moment, they stood there. Nothing but the soft hum of the computer and the ghost of Angel Parker laughter playing faintly in the background. Then, gently, Frederick reached out and touched Ma's hand. She didn't pull away. That night, something changed. Not in words, not in declarations, but in presence. Mia lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from awareness. Something was forming between them, something unspoken, but undeniable. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's story. She felt like she might belong to it. Upstairs, Eli stirred in his sleep and mumbled a sound soft, high-pitched, almost a word. Melissa didn't hear it, but the house did. It was listening now, and so was she. The next morning began with the smell of cinnamon drifting through the kitchen. Melissa stood barefoot on the tile floor, gently flipping slices of French toast on the skillet. Her apron was dusted with flour, and a faint smile played on her lips as she hummed an old Sam Cooke tune under her breath. It was a quiet joy, simple, rooted, something she hadn't felt in years. Frederick entered the room quietly, freshly showered, and dressed in a white button-down and grey slacks, but without a tie for once. He paused at the doorway, watching her work. Didn't know breakfast could sound so good, he said softly. Melissa glanced over her shoulder. You mean smell? He leaned against the doorframe. Number, I meant what I said. There was a pause, light but meaningful. She slid 2 golden slices onto a plate and turned off the stove. Eli's still asleep, she said. Thought I'd surprise him. He likes the edges a little crispy. Frederick stepped into the kitchen and began setting out forks and napkins. You always remember the details. Melissa looked down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The details are where the heart lives. He stopped for a moment, considering her words, then resumed, setting the table. I never noticed how empty this place felt until you started filling it. Before Mia could respond, the baby monitor on the counter crackled softly. Eli's sleepy whimper, then the gentle thump of his feet hitting the carpet. Mia moved instinctively, removing her apron. I'll go. Frederick touched her wrist. Let me. It was a subtle shift, but she understood. This was his moment now. She watched as he walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. A man who used to keep one hand on the world and one foot out the door, now fully present. When he returned with Eli in his arms, the boy was clutching a small plush bear and blinking against the morning light. Frederick set him gently in his booster chair and sat next to him. Good morning, buddy, Melissa said, placing the plate in front of him. Your favorite? Eli didn't answer, but he picked up a piece of toast with his fingers and began chewing slowly. Melissa watched the way Frederick helped him dab syrup on it, his movements careful, patient. There was no rush in the room, no pressure, just connection. Later that day, the house welcomed a guest, Dr. Mitchell Reeves, Eli's longtime developmental psychologist, a petite woman with sharp eyes behind silver-framed glasses. She had known Eli since he was 2. She stepped into the foyer with a calm smile. Still smells like expensive silence in here, she said, half teasing. Frederick chuckled. That's changing. Melissa offered her a glass of water and escorted her to the sunroom where Eli was stacking wooden blocks by the window. Frederick watched from the doorway, his hands clenched just a bit. Dr. Mitchell Reeves, observed the boy quietly, then leaned toward Melissa. He's focused, she whispered. And peaceful, Frederick stepped in. Do you see progress? Mitchell Reeves nodded slowly. Not just in behavior, in attachment. He's bonding. Frederick looked at Melissa. Mitchell Reeves followed his gaze. Tell me, Miss Simmons, what are you doing differently? Mia hesitated. I treat him like he's already whole, not broken. Mitchell Reeves studied hair. That's rare. It shouldn't be, Mia replied softly. After the session, Mitchell Reeves pulled Frederick aside. You've done more than hire help, she said. You've invited something sacred into this house. Don't forget that. Frederick didn't respond right away. He watched Melissa in the distance, kneeling beside Eli, showing him how to sign happy with her hands. His son mimicked Herm perfectly, shyly, but it was there. That afternoon, Melissa wandered out to the garden alone, needing space to think. The camellias were blooming fuller now, thick with pink and white petals. She sat on the stone bench and exhaled slowly. She was growing attached dangerously. So, this was meant to be temporary. A job, a brief chapter between responsibilities. But somewhere, in the quiet moments, in Eli's touch and Frederick's changing eyes, it had begun to feel like more. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo her mother and younger sister on a porch swing. Her mother was laughing, head tilted back. Her sister's hands were caught mid-sign. Melissa traced their faces with a thumb. I still carry you, she whispered. Behind her, footsteps approached. I hope I'm not interrupting. Frederick's voice, gentle now. Melissa quickly tucked the photo away. Just thinking. He sat beside her. Not too close. I've been meaning to ask. He began, then paused. Why did you take this job? She turned to him, eyes calm. Because I needed to remember who I was, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could help someone do the same. Frederick nodded. You've helped more than you know. A beat. Then Melissa said, And you? Why did you really hire me? He hesitated at first, desperation. I was exhausted, out of ideas. But then I saw how Eli looked at you. Not afraid, not shrinking, just still. They were quiet for a moment. I owe you an apology, Frederick added. When you first arrived, I dismissed you. I made assumptions. I thought that I was just a maid, she said without malice. He looked ashamed. Yes, Melissa met his eyes. People do all the time. But you're not, he said. No, she whispered. I'm someone who sees people others overlook. He nodded slowly. You saw him, and now I see you." Something shifted in the air between them, delicate and dangerous. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows painted the hallways, Mia passed by the open study door. Inside, Frederick sat at the piano, an old upright piece Melissa had dusted off weeks earlier. He struck a few tentative chords, then began to play a melody, halting, unsure but lovely. She stood quietly, listening. When he finished, she stepped inside. "I didn't know you played." "I used to," he said. "Angel Parker made me promise I'd teach Eli one day." "Keep that promise," Melissa said. "Music speaks even when we don't." He looked up. "Would you sit with me?" She did. He began again, slower this time. Melissa hummed along, then without thinking, began to sign the lyrics to an old lullaby. Eli's lullaby. Her hands moved with grace, her face lit with tenderness. Frederick stopped playing and just watched. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. Melissa looked at him, her hands still mid-motion. "I'm just present," she replied. "Most people aren't." Frederick reached out, brushing a fingertip against her wrist. It was a question. She didn't pull away. It was an answer. Upstairs, Eli stirred in his bed, and for the first time called out, not with a cry, but a word. "Dada!" It echoed down the staircase like a bell. Frederick froze. Melissa gasped. And the house, so long cloaked in silence and grief, suddenly felt alive again. The word hung in the air like a fragile miracle. Dada. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfectly clear, but it was there, real, alive. Frederick shot to his feet, nearly knocking the piano bench over. Melissa was already moving, her instincts sharper than her thoughts, and together they raced up the stairs. The world suddenly sharpened into focus by that single word. Eli sat upright in bed, his small hands gripping the edge of the blanket. His eyes were wide, not frightened, just uncertain, as if he himself was unsure what had come out of his mouth. But when he saw Frederick at the door, something flickered across his face, recognition, a kind of vulnerable hope. Frederick dropped to his knees beside the bed. "Say it again," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, just one more time." Eli blinked, lips parting. He looked at Melissa standing just behind, then back at his father. No words came. Just a tiny hand reaching forward, resting against Frederick's chest. It was enough. Frederick wrapped his arms around his son, holding him as though he'd fall apart if he didn't. "You did it," he murmured over and over, forehead pressed gently to Eli's hair. "You did it, buddy." Melissa stood quietly in the doorway, hands clasped to her chest. She didn't intrude, didn't speak. This moment belonged to them, but her eyes, wet, soft, glowing, held the quiet satisfaction of someone who had given a piece of herself and was now watching something sacred bloom. The next morning, the house felt transformed. There was light in the windows that hadn't been noticed before, warmth in the silence that used to echo hollowly. Even the staff moved differently, slower, quieter, reverent, as if they sensed a shift. None of them could explain. Frederick candled all his meetings for the day. His assistant didn't question it. "Family day," he said. "Non-negotiable." He spent the morning with Eli, reading picture books in the sunroom, building towers out of plastic bricks, and most remarkably getting a giggle when he made a silly face. It wasn't much, but it was a sound Frederick had waited years to hear. A sound that brought him to the edge of tears more than once. Melissa stayed near, not hovering, just present. She brought snacks, wiped sticky fingers, offered soft encouragements, and whenever Eli looked her way, he smiled small, fleeting smiles, but smiles nonetheless. Around noon, Dr. Mitchell Reeves returned, unannounced, but not unwelcome. Frederick had texted her the night before. 3 words, all caps. He said, "Dada." She stepped into the foyer like a detective, entering a scene of quiet joy. "You weren't kidding," she said after watching Eli play for 5 minutes. "His eyes are clearer. He's grounding." Frederick nodded. Melissa was there when it happened. Mitchell Reeves turned. "That doesn't surprise me." They stepped aside into the dining room, letting Eli and Mia play uninterrupted. "You know, this changes everything," Lydia said. "I know you'll need to consider long-term care, adjust your routines, possibly reintroduce therapies. His progress may accelerate now." I want you to lead it, Frederick said. But only if Melissa stays involved. Lydia raised a brow. She's not a therapist, Frederick. She's something better, he replied. She's someone he trusts. Lydia considered this, then nodded slowly. Fair point. After lunch, Melissa excused herself to take a short break. She walked to the garden again, her place of reflection, and sat by the camellias. The spring breeze teased her braids, and she tilted her face toward the sun, letting it warm her skin. She should be happy, Eli had spoken. Frederick was changing, but there was a tremor in her chest she couldn't quite name. She was growing roots where she'd promised herself she wouldn't. Melissa, she turned. Frederick stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, a hesitant smile on his lips. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said. You didn't. He sat beside her on the bench. I was thinking we should celebrate. Just something small. A dinner tonight. Just us and Eli. Melissa's eyes softened. That sounds lovely. He nodded. And tomorrow I want to show you something. Something personal. She tilted her head. It's not far. Just something I haven't shared in a long time about Emma. The mention of his late wife made the air still. Melissa placed a gentle hand on his arm. You don't have to. I want to, he said. You've given so much to our home. I want you to know where this all began. That evening, dinner was simple but meaningful grilled salmon, asparagus, mashed sweet potatoes. Melissa cooked. Frederick set the table, and Eli picked out a napkin for everyone. He handed Mia a blue one, himself a red, and his father a yellow. It was the first time Melissa had seen him make a deliberate choice that included her. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace. Frederick poured them each a glass of wine. Melissa's just half as she preferred. I used to sit right here with Emma, he said, his voice low. This exact spot. When we first bought the house, we couldn't afford to furnish most of it, but we had this fireplace and a second-hand record player. He smiled, eyes distant. She used to sing to Eli every night, even when he wouldn't respond. Even when the silence felt endless, she never gave up on him. Mia's throat tightened. You remind me of her, he said suddenly. Not because you're similar, but because you love with the same stubborn depth. She looked at him surprised. I'm not saying that lightly. There was a pause. The fire crackled. I don't know where this is going, he admitted, but I know what I feel when you're near, and I know how Eli changes around you. She looked down, heart racing. Do you feel it too? He asked. Mia met his gaze. Yes, but I'm scared. So am I. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Later that night, Mia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her room was small, modest, tucked at the back of the house, but it was hers for now. A knock came at the door. She rose, heart fluttering, and opened it. It was Frederick. Not in a suit, not in armor, just him. I couldn't sleep, he said. Me neither. He didn't step in, didn't reach for her, just looked at her like she mattered. I just wanted to say thank you for helping me find him, for helping me find myself. She smiled softly. Good night, Frederick. Good night, Melissa. And he walked away. She closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled long and deep. It wasn't love yet, but it was something real. And that was how everything truly began. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Melissa's room, casting soft golden shapes across the floorboards. She lay in bed longer than usual, eyes open, heart beating with a strange calm. The memory of Frederick's voice the night before lingered in the silence. It hadn't been a confession, not exactly, but it had been something deeper, an invitation into a truth they were both still learning to name. By the time she made her way to the kitchen, the house was already stirring. Eli sat at the island counter, sipping from a plastic cup of orange juice, while Frederick leaned over a skillet, attempting scrambled eggs. Melissa paused in the doorway, watching the two of them, father and son, side by side, like a picture from a family album long overdue. Frederick noticed her first. Good morning, he said with a warm smile, wearing a navy t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual crisp button-down. Eli turned, spotted Melissa, and his eyes brightened. He didn't say a word, but he reached out his hand toward her. It was the first time he'd initiated contact. Melissa crossed the room and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Good morning, sweetheart," she whispered. Frederick looked on, the corner of his mouth twitching in quiet awe. "I was thinking we could take Eli to the park today," he said. "There's one not far from here, Piedmont Park. I haven't taken him out in a while, but I feel like maybe it's time." Melissa blinked, surprised. "That's a big step." "I know, but I want to try." The outing wasn't planned with perfection, and that was part of its charm. Melissa packed a small bag with snacks and wipes. Frederick brought a blanket and a collapsible stroller, and Eli wore a baseball cap. He refused to take off. The car ride was quiet, but peaceful, with soft jazz playing low, and the city slowly unfolding through the windows. Piedmont Park was alive with spring children laughing, couples walking dogs, old men reading newspapers on benches. They found a spot beneath a tall oak tree and laid out the blanket. Frederick sat with Eli, pointing at the ducks on the lake, while Melissa unpacked some sliced apples and cheese crackers. Eli didn't say much, but his eyes followed everything. He watched a group of boys playing catch nearby, his gaze lingering longer than usual. "Would you like to try, Eli?" Frederick asked gently, nodding toward the game. Eli looked at Melissa. His expression was uncertain. She smiled. "Well, just watch for now. Okay, maybe next time." He seemed content with that, curling up beside her and munching on a cracker. A few minutes later, a voice called out from across the field. "Mr. Douglas, is that you?" Frederick looked up. A woman in her early 40s approached, dressed in running gear and sunglasses. "Rebecca Thorne," she said, extending her hand. "We met at the Chamber of Commerce dinner last year." Frederick stood polite but guarded. "Ah, yes, of course. Good to see you." Rebecca glanced at Melissa, then down at Eli. "This must be your son, I heard. Well, I'm glad to see he's doing okay." Melissa felt the tone shift, slightly subtle but unmistakable. That quick assessment, that flicker of surprise at Ma's presence beside them. Rebecca's eyes didn't linger, but her smile tightened. "Your new nanny?" Frederick's spine straightened. "This is Melissa Simmons. She's part of our family." Rebecca blinked. "Oh, well, that's nice." She turned to Eli again, then back at Frederick. "Listen, I don't want to intrude. Just wanted to say hello. We should catch up sometime. I'll send you a message." With that, she jogged off. Melissa pretended to focus on Eli's snack, but she felt the heat crawl up her neck. Frederick sat back down beside her, silent for a moment. "I'm sorry about that," he said softly. "You don't have to be." "No," he insisted, turning to her. "You deserve more than to be seen as just someone who works for me." Melissa met his eyes. "I don't need validation from strangers, Frederick. I know who I am." His expression softened. "I wish everyone had your clarity." They spent another hour in the park, letting Eli explore the grass, listen to birdsong, and gather small rocks like treasure. When it was time to leave, he didn't cry. He held Melissa's hand and walked beside her all the way to the car. That evening, as twilight deepened over the estate, Frederick stood by the window in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Melissa knocked gently on the door. "Come in." She stepped inside, pausing at the threshold. "Eli's asleep. Thank you." He gestured for her to sit. "There's something I want to show you." He opened a drawer and pulled out a worn photo album. Melissa moved closer, sitting beside him on the leather sofa. The album smelled faintly of old paper and lavender. "This," he said, opening to the first page, "was Angel Parker's idea. She started it when we first found out we were pregnant. Every month, a new photo, every milestone, and then after she passed, I stopped adding to it. The photos were beautiful. Angel Parker glowing smile, a baby Eli bundled in blankets, tiny footprints pressed in ink. As they turned the pages, the images faded from color to grayscale. Not physically, but emotionally. "This is the last one," Frederick said, pointing to a photo of Angel Parker holding Eli under a maple tree, her face radiant despite the 4-line taped to her arm. 2 weeks before she died, Melissa ran her fingers gently along the plastic sleeve. "She loved him so much." "She did," he whispered, "and I failed her. I shut down. I buried myself in work, in meetings, in pretending that grief wasn't eating me alive. You were surviving." Frederick turned to her. "You're helping me live." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. "I've been thinking," he said, after a moment. "I want to formally hire you, not just as a housemaid or a caretaker, but as Eli's developmental guide. We'll set up training, a plan. I'll make it official." Melissa blinked. "That's generous. It's not generosity. It's necessity. You've done more for him than any therapist or specialist in the last 2 years." She nodded slowly. "I'll accept in one condition." "Name it." "That we keep doing this together as a team. No titles, no distance." He held her gaze. "Deal." They sat there. The album opened between them. Two people bound by loss, and something slowly growing beyond it. Just before she left the room, Frederick called her name. "Melissa." She turned. He stood, walked toward her, and then without rushing, he pulled her into an embrace. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something older, deeper recognition, the kind that says, "I see you." And in the quiet safety of that moment, Melissa finally allowed herself to believe she belonged. The next morning began with an unexpected knock. Not the gentle kind that hinted at domestic routine, but a sharp, echoing rap that stirred both tension and memory. Melissa was in the kitchen preparing Eli's favorite oatmeal when she heard it. Frederick appeared seconds later, his brow creased even before he reached the door. Standing outside was a man in a tailored grey suit with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He wasn't alone. 2 others flanked him, one in business casual, the other in a sharp blazer with an earpiece. The insignia on the clipboard read, "Child Welfare Services." "Mr. Douglas?" the man asked, polite but firm. Frederick nodded slowly. "Yes. What's this about?" "I'm Marcus Fielding. We've received a report of possible neglect concerning your son, Aaron Douglas. We're here for an assessment." For a moment, the only sound was the wind through the trees. Melissa had stepped into the hallway by then, holding Eli close against her hip. She could feel his little heart pounding through her blouse. Frederick stepped outside, pulling the door halfway closed behind him. "This is absurd. Who filed this report? I'm afraid we're not permitted to disclose the source during the initial evaluation. May we come in?" "No," Frederick said. His voice was calm, but Melissa recognized the storm behind it. "Not until I speak to my attorney." "You have every right to contact legal counsel," Marcus replied. "However, if you deny entry during a welfare check, we'll need to escalate. A court order can be requested." Melissa stepped forward, still holding Eli, who now clutched her tighter. "He's safe," she said, her voice steady. "I've been with him every day. There's no neglect." Marcus studied her. "And you are?" "Melissa Simmons. I've been working here for several months. I'm his full-time caregiver." Another agent jotted something into a notebook. Frederick exhaled through his nose. "Give me 5 minutes." He returned inside and made 2 calls, first to his lawyer, then to the head of a private security firm. When he returned, he opened the door fully. "You may enter, but you do so under observation, and nothing is to be touched without consent." They stepped inside, their eyes scanning the foyer like they were entering a crime scene. Melissa held Eli protectively, whispering to him in a soft rhythm only he understood. Frederick stayed close, his body language sharp, restrained. The agents conducted their assessment in quiet efficiency, checking the pantry, the nursery, the backyard. One agent asked to speak with Eli alone. Melissa declined on his behalf. "He doesn't speak with strangers. He has autism. I'm his comfort," his voice. "You can ask and I'll translate in sign if needed." "Noted," Marcus said, scribbling. They didn't find anything. Of course, there was nothing to find. But just before they left, Marcus turned back. "This visit was protocol, but off the record, Mr. Douglas, it's rare that we see a child this well cared for. Whoever sent the complaint may have had other motivations." Frederick closed the door behind them, jaw tight. Melissa stood nearby, still holding Eli, who had fallen asleep from the tension. "Someone's trying to get to us," she said softly. Frederick nodded. "And I think I know who." He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Later that afternoon, Frederick called a meeting in his home office. The guest list was Small Melissa, his attorney Sandra Griffin, and a security advisor named Lionel Hatch, a calm, silver-haired man with decades in federal protection services. "This wasn't random," Frederick began. We've been getting resistance on the upcoming tech acquisition. Silent pressure. Now this. I want a full background check on everyone who's had access to my family's internal calendar." Sandra looked up from her notes. "You think it was an internal leak?" "I think it was personal," Frederick said, glancing at Melissa and targeted. Lionel tapped the table. "I'll start the sweep. Phones, laptops, digital footprints. If someone tried to weaponize child welfare, we'll find the source." When the meeting ended, Melissa lingered behind. Frederick looked at her. "You don't have to stay involved in this." "Yes, I do," she said. "This isn't just your fight now. It's Eli's, and I'm not going anywhere." His eyes flickered. "You always speak like someone who's lost something important." Mia exhaled. "I have, but Eli isn't going to be one of those things." He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. That night after dinner, Mia sat on the porch swing with Eli nestled against her. The stars were just starting to show, one by one. She watched them light up the sky like old truths finally being revealed. Frederick joined her, 2 cups of tea in hand. "Mind if I sit?" She moved over and he took the space beside her. "Close but not imposing. I used to think silence was a curse," he said. "That quiet meant something was broken, but I'm starting to understand there's different kinds of silence." She looked at him. "There's the silence of grief," he continued, "the silence of shame, and then there's the kind that's safe, like right now." Melissa held her tea carefully. "Safe silence. That's rare," he nodded, sipping. "You've given that to him, to me too." They sat in that silence for a long while, the night deepening around them. Then Frederick asked, "Have you ever thought about what it would mean if Eli could talk? Not just with his hands, with words." Melissa looked out into the dark yard. "Sometimes, but I think about what he already says in other ways. When he takes my hand, when he leans into me without asking, that's speaking. It's just a different language." Frederick's voice was quiet. "You're teaching me to listen to that language." And then, like a whisper from the wind, a new voice cut through the quiet, small, hesitant. Melissa froze. Frederick looked down. Eli, half asleep, had shifted. His lips had formed the syllable again. "Mama." It was no longer imagined, no longer a dream. Frederick's eyes widened. Melissa's hands trembled. Her breath caught in her chest. "Eli, what did you say?" The boy blinked slowly. His eyes fluttered, then closed again. Frederick turned to Melissa. "Did you hear that?" "I did," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I did." It was the first word he'd spoken aloud in nearly 2 years. Frederick didn't speak for a full minute. Then he reached for her hand. No hesitation, no pretense. "We're going to protect him," he said, voice solid now. "Whoever came after us, they won't get another chance." Melissa nodded, tears finally slipping free. The porch lights flickered gently above them, casting a warm glow on the 3 of them seated on that old swing step closer to healing. One word closer to a future none of them thought possible. The following morning brought no sense of calm. The house was still, but it carried a tension beneath its quietness, a sense that something unseen had shifted. Frederick rose earlier than usual and made his way to the gym, throwing himself into the punching bag with the kind of intensity that didn't come from physical training, but from something deeper, unresolved. Mia woke to the muffled thud of his fists, echoing faintly down the hall. She slipped out of bed and checked on Eli first. He was curled up under the quilt, his breathing soft and even, his little arm cradling the stuffed bear she'd mended for him last week. A miracle still echoed in her chest, this voice. The word he'd spoken, "Mama." It hadn't been loud, but it had been real. Downstairs, Melissa brewed coffee, the scent curling through the kitchen like a small gesture of normally. By the time Frederick returned, sweat-drenched and silent, she handed him a mug without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing. He paused for just a beat too long. "Thanks," he said, voice. "Didn't sleep much, I could tell," Melissa replied gently. He stared into his cup, then asked, "Has he said anything this morning?" She shook her head. "But it wasn't a dream." "I know what I heard." "So do you." "I do," he said quietly, then exhaled. "But that also means whoever came after us knows how close he's getting, and they might try again." Ma's expression sharpened. "Let them try. Frederick gave her a look that was half surprised, half grateful. You're braver than most people I know. I'm not brave, she said. I'm protective. That's different. They sat across from each other, a calm before a storm they both sensed was coming. Minutes later, Lionel Hatch arrived, carrying a file under his arm and wearing a look that left no room for pleasantries. I have something, he said as he entered Frederick's study. I ran cross-checks on all communications coming out of this property over the past 60 days. There's a match. Frederick sat forward. Melissa remained standing, arms folded tightly. Someone accessed your schedule through a side channel and old assistant who still had limited database clearance. Frederick frowned. That would be Tasha Lewis. Lionel finished. Terminated 6 months ago, but someone forgot to revoke her cloud-level access. And guess who she's now working for? Melissa's jaw clenched. Let me guess, Lark Technologies. Lionel nodded. And not just working, she's engaged to their COO. Frederick slammed his fist onto the desk. So this wasn't just corporate, it was personal. They knew how to hit where it hurts through Eli. Exactly. The welfare report was just the first move, Lionel added. But there's more. They filed a quiet injunction, claiming your acquisition of one of their subsidiaries involved coercion. That's absurd, Frederick snapped. They're playing dirty, Melissa said, eyes narrowing. And they're using Eli to rattle you. Not just me, Frederick replied. Us. Lionel leaned in. There's one move left, sir. You file a counter motion. Bring all of this to light, but it comes with a risk. They'll dig into everything, including Melissa. She looked up. I don't have anything to hide. Frederick stood. And even if she did, it wouldn't matter. She's part of this family now. I'm not letting them drag her name through the mud. Melissa's breath caught. He hadn't said those words before. Not like that. Her eyes searched his face, trying to find if he meant it or was just trying to protect her legally, but he held her gaze with a quiet certainty. I'm going to make the call, he said. We take them to court, publicly. By late afternoon, news began to trickle out through press channels. Douglas Dynamics had filed a countersuit against Lark Technologies, citing defamation, emotional trauma, and abuse of government agencies for personal gain. Melissa watched the news unfold from the guest room, Eli asleep, beside her. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive, some were confused, others were hostile. One message stood out. It was from a private number. I know what you are. He'll find out too. You don't belong there. She stared at it, hands shaking. Frederick found her 20 minutes later. Her expression told him everything. He didn't ask. He just took her phone and scrolled. When he saw the message, his jaw tensed. This has to stop, he said. She looked up. They're not going after you. They're going after me because they can't touch me without touching you first. There was silence between them. Then Frederick said, Come with me. He led her down the hall to the family room where a fire had been lit and soft jazz played in the background. Eli stirred on the couch, blinking sleepily. Frederick knelt beside him and began signing slowly. Melissa watched, surprised. His signs were clumsy but sincere. Safe, Daddy. Love, Melissa. Eli's face lit up with a small smile. Frederick turned to Melissa. I've been learning quietly because if I'm going to be the father he needs, I can't wait for someone else to teach me. She didn't speak, not at first. Her throat tightened too much, but when she finally found her voice, it was soft. You're already becoming that. That night, Lionel's team set up a surveillance grid around the estate. Drones, motion sensors, secured perimeter alarms. No one would come near the house unnoticed again. But the storm wasn't just outside. It was in headlines, in whispers, in anonymous comments online. Melissa became a quiet lightning rod, praised by some, vilified by others. Rumors swirled that she was a gold digger, that she had seduced Frederick for power, that she had manipulated a vulnerable child. Frederick tried to shield her. He issued statements, stood by her side at every press conference, but some shadows couldn't be pushed away with statements. One night, after a particularly cruel article called her the Maid who would be queen, Melissa sat alone on the back porch wrapped in a blanket. Frederick joined her quietly, handing her a cup of tea. I used to think I could fix everything with money, he said. Turns out the things that matter most can't be bought. They have to be fought for. She sipped, eyes red. Do you think it'll ever stop? He looked at her. Number, but I think we'll get stronger together. Her voice cracked. Do you ever regret bringing me into all this? He didn't answer with words. He reached over, took her hand, and placed it over his heart. No, he said simply, because you brought me back to mine. Tears filled her eyes again. But this time they weren't from hurt. They were from hope. And that night, in the quiet hush of a house on the edge of scandal, the three of them, Frederick, Melissa, and Eli, slept under the same roof, with something they hadn't shared fully before, a sense of family, fragile, earned, but real. The courtroom was colder than expected, a stark contrast to the emotional heat simmering beneath Mia's skin. She sat quietly beside Frederick at the defense table, hands folded tightly in her lap, her breath steady but shallow around them. Cameras clicked and murmurs stirred as reporters filled every available seat in the gallery. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a spectacle. Judge Adeline Monroe, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, pulled tightly into a bun, entered and called the session to order. Her presence was commanding without being cruel, her gavel echoing through the room with finality. This court will now hear Douglas Dynamics versus Lark Technologies, she said, voice unwavering. Melissa's eyes flicked towards the opposing side. Tasha Lewis sat smugly in the front row, her engagement ring catching the light like a trophy. Beside her was Greg Sinclair, the COO of Lark. With the coldness of a man who thought everything was a negotiation, they barely spared Melissa a glance, as if her role in the case was ornamental at best. But she wasn't here to be overlooked. Not anymore. Frederick leaned over and whispered, "They're expecting you to flinch. Don't give them the satisfaction." She gave a tight nod. Her fingers still trembled, but her heart didn't. The first testimonies began. Legal jargon filled the air. Each side presenting arguments about data access, unauthorized schedule leaks, and the weaponization of the welfare system. Lionel Hatch took the stand, delivering his findings with clinical precision. He outlined the digital trail, the unrevoked access, and the links between Tasha and Lark Technologies. The court listened, but the tension didn't truly rise until Mia's name was mentioned. And what role did Miss Melissa Simmons play in any of these corporate decisions? The opposing attorney asked, voice sharp with condescension. Lionel answered calmly, none. She was a house staff member. Her only concern was the safety of the child. Ah, then why? The attorney pressed. Did she continue to involve herself in matters far beyond her professional scope before Lionel could respond? Judge Monroe raised a hand. Miss Simmons, are you prepared to testify today? Melissa froze. Frederick looked at her. It's your call. She stood slowly, legs steady despite her heartbeat. Yes, Your Honor, I'm ready. The courtroom shifted. Every eye turned to her. As she approached the stand, Tasha smirked, and Mia met her gaze without flinching. Under oath, Mia recounted the events. She spoke of finding Eli, of the silent moments that passed between her and the boy who had not spoken for years. She told them about learning his signs, about the night of the fake welfare call, about the terror in Eli's eyes when strangers entered the home. And did Mr. Douglas instruct you to act beyond your duties? The Lark attorney asked, leaning forward. No, Mia replied, but I chose to protect that boy. I would do it again. And why would a housekeeper insert herself into such a delicate situation? The implication was clear. The insult hung in the air. Melissa's voice didn't shake. Because that little boy wasn't just frightened, he was forgotten. And I know what that feels like. The courtroom quieted. Even Tasha's smirk slipped. Madja continued. I grew up in a system that never noticed when I went hungry or when my sister couldn't hear and no one bothered to learn how to talk to her. I promised myself that if I ever saw that look in another child's eyes, I wouldn't walk away. Judge Monroe regarded her carefully. Thank you, Miss Simmons. You may step down. As Melissa returned to her seat, Frederick gave her hand the slightest squeeze beneath the table. You were remarkable, he whispered. She didn't smile. Not yet. The fight wasn't over. Outside, the courthouse steps overflowed with press. Reporters shouted questions about her relationship with Frederick, about the rumors of financial motivation, about her background. Melissa kept her chin high, answering none of them. Frederick placed a protective hand at her back as they walked toward the car. Inside the vehicle, silence settled again until Melissa finally asked, "Do you regret putting me on that stand?" He turned to her. "Not even for a second. You are the most truthful person in that courtroom. But they'll twist it. They always do." "Then let them twist," Frederick said. "You don't bend." That evening, back at the estate, Eli sat with Melissa in the sunroom. He was quiet, hands resting on his knees, gaze distant. She signed slowly. "Are you okay?" He hesitated, then signed back. "I heard them say bad things." Melissa knelt beside him. "They don't know you. They don't know us." Eli nodded. Then in halting fingers he added, "You're still here." Her heart broke open a little. "I'll always be here." Across the room, Frederick watched the exchange. Later that night, he invited her into his office. There on the desk sat a document thick, embossed, official-looking. "What is this?" she asked. "My will," he said plainly. "I'm naming you guardian. If anything happens to me, don't," she interrupted. "Don't talk like that." "I have to," he insisted. "They're not just attacking my business. They're coming after my soul. And my soul lives in that boy." She swallowed hard. "And what if they find something on me? What if they dig too deep? Then let them, because you've already proven something more powerful than a background check." "What? That you love him?" There was no romance in his tone, no dramatic flair, just the truth. And sometimes that was the most beautiful thing. Later that week, a ruling came through. The court found insufficient evidence for Lark Technologies' allegations and dismissed the case with prejudice. But the judge's final remarks were what silenced the crowd. "I find it deeply disturbing." Judge Monroe said that a private corporation would manipulate child welfare systems for corporate gain. Miss Simmons' actions reflect the highest moral standard, one we would do well to emulate. This court recognizes her not just as a witness, but as a protector. The room erupted in whispers. Tasha's face blanched. Greg Sinclair stood and walked out before the gavel even fell. Outside press again swarmed Melissa. This time the questions were softer. Some were even kind. "How does it feel to be vindicated? Will you stay with the Douglas family?" Frederick stepped forward, shielding her. But Melissa didn't retreat. She turned to the cameras, eyes steady. "I didn't do this to win," she said. "I did it because a little boy needed someone who wouldn't leave. That night at home, the quiet was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of something sacred." Eli fell asleep beside her on the couch, his hand curled in hers. Frederick stood by the doorway, watching them both with a look that no longer needed explanation. Family wasn't always made by blood. Sometimes it was chosen in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it was proven in a courtroom, and sometimes it was simply a hand held through the storm, refusing to let go. The following morning carried a kind of stillness that felt unfamiliar. Not the quiet of uncertainty, but the calm that follows after a long, punishing storm. Sunlight spilled through the estate's tall windows, warming the marble floors that once felt too cold, too sterile. Now the house seemed a living not with noise, but with peace. Melissa stood at the kitchen counter making pancakes from scratch. Eli sat on a stool nearby, still in his pajamas, watching her with the soft gaze of a child who finally felt safe. He didn't speak, rarely did, but he signed one word with gentle fingers. "Happy." Melissa's chest tightened. She turned to him and signed back. "Me too." Behind them, Frederick entered quietly, a cup of coffee in hand, tie still hanging loosely around his neck. His presence no longer carried the guarded stiffness of a corporate giant. Now there was a softness in his eyes that Melissa hadn't seen when they first met. "Smells like you're trying to spoil him," he teased lightly. She gave him a wry smile. If he's going to start his day watching the morning news talk about his dad, he deserves pancakes. Frederick sighed, glancing at the muted television in the corner where a live interview was airing. One of the anchors read headlines off a prompter. "Douglas family scandal ends with unexpected hero. The housemaid who stood against a corporation. The boy who spoke through silence. They're not going to let this go any time soon," he muttered. "I know," Melissa replied, flipping a pancake. But we don't need them to. Eli giggled as the pancake landed perfectly in the pan. It was such a simple sound, so small, but it carried weight. It was joy, and in this house, joy had been rare. Later that day, a letter arrived via private courier. It was hand-delivered and sealed in a cream-colored envelope addressed to Melissa. Her brows furrowed as she opened it carefully. Frederick watched her from the library doorway. Something wrong? She unfolded the letter, eyes scanning the handwritten lines, and blinked in disbelief. It's from Judge Monroe, she whispered. She's offering to nominate me for the state's Child Welfare Advisory Board. Frederick stepped forward, startled. That's significant. She says she believes my experience, personal and professional, could help shape future policies. Melissa didn't answer immediately. Her fingers tightened around the paper. It's not just about Eli, is it? It's bigger than him. There are more kids like him out there. Frederick nodded solemnly, and not enough people willing to fight for them. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, Mia saw something beyond the mansion, beyond even Eli. She saw a path, a purpose, not to escape who she was, but to become more of it. That afternoon, the three of them drove out to a modest community center on the edge of the city. The building was old, but clean, its faded blue doors welcoming. Melissa had learned about it through one of the lawyers at the trial and after-school program for children with disabilities, mostly underfunded and understaffed. Inside, children sat in circles, some drawing, others using tablets with assistive communication. One young boy, maybe 7, struggled with his hands, trying to form letters in the air. Melissa knelt beside him and gently guided his fingers. Like this, she said softly, signing the word home. He repeated it, his smile stretching wide as he got it right. Frederick stood in the doorway, Eli beside him, holding his hand. Neither said a word, but their expressions were identical. Awe, admiration, and something tender. When they left, the director of the center followed Melissa out. If you ever wanted to volunteer or teach her, doors are open. She paused, then looked down at Eli, who was now signing to Frederick. I think I'd like that. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in hues of gold, Melissa sat alone in the garden. The scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the air, mingling with the distant sound of wind chimes. She held the judge's letter in one hand and her phone in the other. She finally called someone she hadn't spoken to in years, mother's sister, Aunt Lorraine. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Melissa, sweetheart. Her throat tightened. Hi, I just wanted to hear your voice. Oh, baby. I saw you on the news. I told your cousins. That girl right there, that's my niece. That's Melissa Simmons, and she's got more courage in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. Melissa blinked away tears. I didn't think I'd come this far. Well, you did. And your mama would be proud. They talked for nearly an hour. Laughter returned. Pain surfaced, but so did healing. By the time they said goodbye, Mia felt a piece of herself return, one she didn't know she'd lost. Later that night, Melissa walked into the nursery. Eli was already tucked into bed, a small nightlight glowing beside him. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and turned to leave. Wait, he whispered. She turned, startled. It was the first word he had spoken aloud in months. He pointed to her and whispered again. Stay. Melissa blinked, swallowed the lump in her throat, and sat beside him. He reached for her hand and closed his eyes. Downstairs, Frederick stood at the foot of the staircase listening. When Melissa finally joined him, his eyes searched hers. You okay? I'm more than okay, she said. I feel a hole. Frederick hesitated. There's something I want to ask. She tilted her head. I know this isn't how things usually go, and I don't want to rush anything, but I'd like you to stay. Not just as staff, as family. Melissa's breath caught. Frederick, I'm not asking for answers tonight. I just wanted you to know that no matter what title the world gives, you made witness advocate. You've already become something far more important to me. She looked away, heart pounding. This was never about love. No, he agreed. It was about truth. But sometimes when the truth is finally safe, love follows. In the following weeks, Melissa accepted the judge's nomination. She joined advocacy circles, traveled with Frederick and Eli to community meetings, and started designing inclusive curriculum for schools. Her story spread quietly, respectfully, not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder that sometimes it's not the powerful who change the world, it's the ones who dare to care when no one else will. One spring morning, nearly a year later, a framed photo sat on Frederick's office desk. It showed Melissa and Eli sitting beneath a tree, sunlight filtering through the leaves, both of them laughing with abandon. Above the image in small engraved letters it read, "Family is the place where the storm breaks." And beneath it, a simple quote from Melissa herself, "Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up and staying."